Welcome to another episode of the Roundtable. Today we're going to be talking about advice or things we wish we knew when we were just starting out powerlifting during our junior or whatever phase when we first started. So Sam has gladly wanted to start off. So let's kick things off, Sam.
Yeah, sweet. So first one, it's probably sounds a little bit simple, but auto regulation and knowing that it's okay to pull back if you need. That was a thing that just did not exist in my world of powerlifting when I first started. And I think like looking back, it led to me just flogging myself in the gym week after week after week, led to injuries, which then led to spending more time away from lifting heavy and being detrimental to progress. So yeah, I think going back into my younger years of training, I think I wish I knew more about auto regulation. We can use the word RPE, but just like kind of accepting that, some sessions aren't always going to be firing all cylinders, and pulling some load back isn't going to make you weaker.
Yeah, I think when I first started, or just lifting in general, I had the exact same mindset. Like every week should be adding kilos to the bar, and if you're not adding kilos, you're getting weaker, or the whole session just doesn't matter,
Yeah,
right?
exactly right.
Um, to the point where it's like, yeah, you're hitting like up, or now we know it's come to like RPE 10, right? And like you're hitting it, and it's like grindy as fuck. And then the next week, like you're not even thinking about the next week. You're just thinking about, if I don't do this right now, I'm not getting any stimulus out of whatever training I'm doing, and
Yeah,
that's just
legit. It's
wrong.
like it's that like kind of do or die mentality with training. We spoke about this in like a roundtable a few weeks ago, and Shania was kind of played devil's advocate and said that's, in some sense, that's a positive thing too, because it's a good attitude to have towards training in terms of wanting to push and, um, just in terms of overall, like with powerlifting, like we want to be pushing ourselves week in, week out, progressive overload, like trying to do more and more. But I think there definitely is two sides of the coin. And I think being a younger lifter, it's important to kind of understand where you are in your training, how you're feeling, and whether or not it's kind of warranted to push in that session.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, I was sort of saying like that comes from where Sam or I started with like our powerlifting journey, where like I started powerlifting when like RP and auto regulation was the only thing that I knew. Whereas like I didn't start where it was like the 5x5 RP8 max out, like you got to hit X percentage of your 1 rep max. Like I started out with it being RP auto regulation. So I think, yeah, the Sam just said, like being able to have the best of both worlds and have both mindsets is really good, because it's like there are sessions where, I think a lot of like junior boys, the language is always like, oh, my coach has got me on a leash. It's like, let me go kind of thing. Like, it's like having that mindset of like wanting to push and like just being held back is kind of like, I feel like to me, that's a good feeling, because when you are let go in a way, like you're just going to like, you probably just smack everything that you're like supposed to hit. Whereas I think for me, it's sometimes like, taking the approach of being too tentative or like too cautious of like overshooting or like pushing that little bit. Like it's, you just got to have that fine line.
Yeah,
I
I th-
I remember when I first flipped to RP under Kelly. I think when I first started with Kelly, we were still doing like a bunch of percentage-based programming. I think programming over in Australia was starting to follow the more like RP route. But I remember when we first flipped to RP and she kind of gave me the control. I initially didn't like it because it was like I liked just having a number written down in the program, and like kind of having that control as a younger, intermediate kind of lifter. I found quite difficult. But then, as we went through that journey and kind of using RP as a tool to understand my own lifting, it gave me a lot of knowledge around my own training, my own programming, my own body, and like, situations where one week can be a repeat load, and then the next week, all of a sudden I can take a 20-kilo jump and be fine. So it was kind of lots of opportunities to learn about myself and my own programming through RPE, which I found really useful when me and Kelly first flipped to it. And then it's now working with Jason, it's gone back to the percentage-based programming, and I have a load range each week, and now I'm just going, okay, I'm hitting this today. So I've kind of gone back and forth between both now.
Yeah. It's like when you finally get that control in terms of load selection, right? You realize that even working with the coach, they have no like true understanding, or like they're not going to know exactly what you need to hit to get some sort of stimulus, right? It's all going to be some relative range. So once you have that sense of control, then you can kind of like use indicators that a coach isn't going to know right off the bat, right? Like, how tired am I feeling? Did I get enough sleep? Did I fuel myself up? Like, all those factors, you're probably going to get that information quicker and be able to execute on that if you are responsible for selecting your own loads. So that's really huge. I think
I've got a client. Oh, sorry, I've got a client right now who like asked me that question. She was like, "What load should I be doing? Like, we've just started. We're probably like in our second block, so we've probably been working like for about 8 weeks now." And she was like, "What load should I be doing? Like, what should I be doing for my top set of squats, or like, my back downs? Like, what should the difference in like numbers be? Should it be like a 5 kilo drop for like first back down from top set?" And I was talking to her and explaining it where like RP is like your perception of like how hard you're working. Like, I can look at a video and be like, that looks like an RPE 6, but if you're rating it like an RPE 7, RPE 8, because that's how it feels to you, there's no right or wrong with it. Like, it was like, I can't really give you loads or tell you what to do now, because we're still like just starting to work together, and I'm still starting to understand like how you work, either like, how fast you die off in a set, or, getting used to like, as coaches, we all have that like view, or that like perception of like watching a video and being able to like, rate what we roughly think the RPE is just based on like knowledge and, as we gain more experience. But yeah, to me, I was kind of just like to her, I was like, just push. Like, if you push and like you hit a load that you like either miss the last rep, or, you absolutely, you end up doing like RPE 10, it's fine. Cause like once you do that, that's when you know how hard you can actually push. And I know where your limit kind of is as well.
Yeah, I guess to like circle back all the way to the beginning, right? And when Sam was talking about like pushing and making it do or die, I think it's good in a sense that if you have that mentality, you're going to train hard enough to elicit those gains, right? But I think the mistake that beginner lifters make is if you only have that mentality and you don't know, I guess, like priority of where you are in a prep or something like that, and you just push no matter what, wherever, irrespective of like, how sustainable this is, or you just don't have those factors considered, that's when you can get into a bit of trouble. So I think having like, once you get some experience under your belt and you realize, okay, I can have this do or die mentality and push really, really hard, but I can only last a block and do that really well before things start to die out, or, I start to get hurt. Right. So I think as you start getting more experience, it's like being able to flip back into that mentality, but using it not sparingly, but using it when it's time to use it. Yeah. One that I had down is I just wrote a phrase: everyone gets hurt, but very few injuries are career ending. So I think for me, like, and I guess it comes like, if I were to think about it, right? Like, when I first started, I was coming from playing other sports and just looking at professional athletes, like, for example, like NBA players, right? And you'd see someone experience a knee injury, ACL, MCL, and you go, okay, their career's done. They're washed up now, right? And then fast forward to when I started doing powerlifting, and like I had a minor strain and I started experience like, severe pain in the moment. I was like, oh no, I'm washed up. My career's over. I'm never gonna get to where I want to get to, because now I've experienced this, and all the people at the highest level got there because they managed their injuries very, very well, and they just got injury free all the way up to like world level, right? And then now that, gotten a couple of years under my belt, seeing what people go through, what I can go through and come out of, it's just not like that, right? Like, you have the ability to rehabilitate, pain management, all these tools that you can use, and just training smarter can get you out of a rut after you've experienced some sort of injury. And, it's temporary. It's not going to last forever.
I think the biggest thing, like with injuries, where I kind of look at them now, like, these little flare-ups and injuries and niggles you get, is like, it's all just kind of building a database to like you said, train smarter moving forward. I think like a lot of time with my mindset, yes, it sucks and you can get sooky and sad and shit, but a lot of time where I end up coming out of it after an injury is taking the positive and looking at, okay, why did this happen? And what can we do next time so it doesn't happen again? And then this can be also from like, mental and also physical side. So you're constantly kind of like, as you get these little flare-ups and injuries that kind of happen, you work with your coach to keep fine-tuning your program, your intensity, your volume, your accessories. So you're just bulletproofing yourself over and over and over again so that they just don't happen. And that just takes time. Like you can have everything, and again, like you can have everything to a T, but at the end of the day, we're lifting, heavy weight. It's an external object. Things can happen, but for the most time, like if you can view injuries as a learning experience and something to learn from, I think that's also, very beneficial. And yeah, like that saying, right? Like the comeback's always greater than the setback. So kind of just like viewing it as like you're going to be stronger out of that injury.
Yeah. I think, yeah, like just to tie that one up, like I said, it's not career ending. Very few, and like the worst that I've seen in stories that I've heard, like we all know Steve, he broke his arm. Leanne as well, she broke her arm. And that's a pretty severe injury. And like in any other sport, right? Like, and especially when you get to like professional level sport, high level sport, like, yes, it could be career ending, but I don't think, and I guess it's a macro perspective, but like powerlifting's not at that stage where the talent level's so high, everyone's getting paid to do it to the point where it's like that minor performance drop after you rehabilitate everything isn't gonna, I guess, like stop you, right? So like fortunately we're at a level where, you could still do this, or pretty much a lot of us, nearly all of us are still doing this as a hobby, right? So the limiting factor is like, if you've experienced that, are you willing to come back and go through the process and continue on after that? But it's not a write-off as soon as you experience something, whether it's like minor or potentially catastrophic.
Yeah, I think too, like tying into like powerlifting specifically, like it's also dependent on like what the injury is and like what you either can or can't do, right? So I think with powerlifting, like it's very much built, it's obviously like around a barbell. So a lot of the movements and like learning how to like be under a barbell and move under a barbell is just like stimulus and like the momentum we build and like being trained for those movements. Whereas like if an injury or a niggle occurs where like you potentially have to remove the barbell, but you can still get stimulus elsewhere, it's not the fact that I guess like you necessarily lose strength again, depending on the injury. Sorry. It just means that you come into like when you introduce the barbell again, it's more of just like a detrained feeling. So a lot of people can associate with like those first few sessions back when like things are feeling really heavy. The movement doesn't feel natural. It's like they think like, strength has progressed all the way back to when they first started powerlifting. Whereas it's just a matter of like, you're just not trained in the movement anymore. So it's like being able to like, again, like that mentality where it's like working around like what you can do rather than just focusing on like what you can't do in that moment.
Yeah. And it's huge as well, like especially when you do experience those detraining feelings, right? Like it's always going to come back faster than I guess the gains or the journey it took to get there in the first place. Like even if you were to take 3-6 months off for whatever reason, right? And then you do start training again, that 2, 3, 1 month that you take training will come back faster than the whole, I guess, like period of time that initially took you to get there in the first place. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. Shania, did you have a point that you had think lurking in your mind?
I had one that was like more along the lines of like weight classes. And like, I guess for me, if like I go back to when I first started, it would be like not holding myself back by like sticking to the smaller weight class or like fixating on a weight class, like just letting myself like get stronger, like look at nutrition as this tool that is like gonna like help benefit me, my strength, my recovery, and just focusing on like, I guess, building no matter what, rather than like fixing on a weight class, getting stronger in that weight class, trying to fill it out, and then like, I guess, getting obsessed over one weight class and then struggling to move up.
Yeah,
That would
I
be the
could
big
attest to
one.
that as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like when I first started, I was like, what, 62, 63-ish, didn't really look after my nutrition or anything. But that's just where my starting point was, right? So like naturally you look at it, and I think at the start it was like either 59 or 66. fortunately, I had a good coach to tell me just go 66. There's no reason for you to be 59. So we just started there, and then it was gradually just building mass, getting heavier and heavier and heavier until it was like, I guess last year Nats where I was like sitting at like 69 kilos by the end of it, right? And really pushing the limits of where I could sit in that weight class while holding as much muscle mass. But there was a period of time, and I guess you could chalk it up to like junior mentality as well, of like, oh, it's my last year as a junior. After this, there's nothing else, I guess, right? So like, I really want to go out with a bang and really maximize this weight class, right? So it was like that led to, going for more aggressive approaches to try stay in that weight class. And that's where you start to see like performance drops, right? Like I did not do well in terms of how that cut went and how that affected my performance. And if you're doing that year in, year out, that's going to end up cutting off your top end potential, right? You're sitting so light when your body wants to get heavier and build on mass. That's just going to take years off the back end of potential gains that you're making.
Especially as a junior, right? Like that's one thing, like with my own training, like if I look back, I think you made a good point in terms of having someone to tell you, or like have someone to offer their opinion on like when you should go up. Like I just didn't really know any different. I never really thought about going to 120, but if I look back at it now, like I was slogging it out, trying to stay at 105, just thinking it was the way, and it's just like what I had to do. And then it wasn't until like I had that guidance to move up a weight class where all of a sudden, I had this huge strength increase. Like I think I put like 10 kilos of body weight on, but I put like 30 kilos on my bench. Like I was like grinding out, like stuck at 140, 3-plate bench for ages. Like it took me like a year and a half, and then got to 150. And then when I went to 120, it was all of a sudden like 170, 175, then 180, like in the blink of an eye. So like I think back and I go, oh, if only I just made that jump when I was a little bit younger, going through those junior years, like what that could have been like. But yeah, I definitely think acknowledging, when it's time to move up is really important. And especially when you're young, just not limiting yourself in that way.
I think it's just like the mindset, because like I've had this conversation, I feel like a lot like recently, where it's like people, like we fixate so much on like, okay, what's your body weight? How much are you lifting? And then where do you see your worth within that weight class? And a lot of people tie their numbers to like, well, I'm not hitting these numbers, so I can't be a 69 for females, or like I'm not hitting these numbers, so I can't be a 76. But it's like you can't look at like the numbers you're hitting where you are now, because like the minute you let your body go and actually like give it a little bit more food, or like, increase your nutrition if you're working with the coach or doing it yourself, like the long-term effect of that is going to far outweigh like holding yourself back for another 2-3 years, like it's that, like you just said, like once you actually started eating up, Sam, like the compound effect of like strength recovery and like how fast you actually saw progression is going to far outweigh, having potentially held yourself back for another like 2-3 years just because like you didn't want to go up or like slowly eat up. And I think that is, another thing that is tricky either way, but it's like, I guess social media too, or like just the people that you're around. Like if you're a younger, like newer lifter who's only been lifting for like, 1 to 3 years, but you're around people that have been lifting for 6, 7, 8 years, you don't see, or you don't realize and understand what they've gone through to get to where they are at that point. Like you think that you should be there already, or like, you're potentially comparing yourself to where they are already, but it's like understanding that they've probably done the same thing. Like an athlete might have started, for Sam, like, potentially started, let's just say 93, then you went to like 105, then you went to 120. It's like that 7-year game plan is like you've gone up 2-3 weight classes, but you're starting at a point, and then it's like you've got to look long term to let each weight class and like each sort of comp be that stepping stone to get to like where you want to be, rather than just like holding yourself back.
I think also maybe like just quickly looking at or acknowledging as a younger lifter, like looking at weight classes as height classes, and like seeing, okay, I'm probably going to end up there anyway in 2, 3, 4 years if I want to stick to powerlifting. Let's just make the jump now and really make the most of it.
I feel like the funniest thing for me is like, I think I was talking to this ages ago, Sam, but it's like looking at like Amanda Lawrence's like squat height on like Alico versus like what mine is. And then like when you look at that compared to like weight classes, I was like, this is wild. Like, I think she's like the squat rack, like maybe like 5 or 6 or something. Whereas I'm like an 11 or 12 and we're like miles apart in terms of like a weight class.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like looking at that as well. It's like when you start to like look at the little things, it's like, yeah, looking at weight classes and height classes is like so important, I think, like now, especially.
Yeah. That got me into a little bit of a trap as well, right? Because like when I was a 66 and I was comparing to the other 66ers, we got Yuki he's really tall. You've got Andrew's taller than me. So I was like, oh, if these two can fit into 66, I definitely can fit into 66. But I think the problem was like once you get to a point where you're building just enough muscle mass where it's time for you to go up, I think that's where you can start to consider going up as well, right? It's not just height, but yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not just height, but using
I mean,
that
you'll
as a
be
kind
like
of
a nugget
gauge.
now in 74, Danny. So
Yeah, exactly. I'll be a nugget.
like you far, like even though they were taller, like you far outweighed from a sense of like how lean you were, like your body fat percentage. Like I would say even like if you were to compare like, you know, bone density and like your actual structure, like you're far more like dense than like what the other two are. So it's like, oh, there's obviously like a whole heap of like other variables that you look at too. But leanness is definitely one of them as well. Like if you capitalize on your weight class and like, you know, you're trying to weight cut being at like that top end of like that 3 to 5% of your weight class and you've got like literally zero body fat on you, it's like, where are you come from kind of thing, you know?
Yeah, that's true. And I guess like just to finish things off with that as well, right? Like I guess you could argue the point that if you are competitive enough to do that, then sure, but you need to outweigh it's like because what you're doing now is essentially pulling from your future gains and trying to realize it in the current moment, right? So what are you trying to do that for? Is it for like just a PR at whatever body weight you're sitting at? Is it for an all-time record? Are you competitive at the world level? So you need to weigh all these things and see whether it's worth it or not for you to, I guess, cut from your future potential, because that's what it's drawing from, right? There's always going to be a cost when you start pushing a weight class of where you're taking this from. So that's a very important thing to consider as well. And it's hard to see it when you're in the moment because you're thinking like, especially as if you're in like last year's a sub junior, last year's a junior, right? You're thinking, okay, this is my final year and I'm going to make the best of it, not realizing that once you finish that class or once you finish that age division, you've got a whole nother 4 years again, right? Like it doesn't just end at sub juniors or juniors.
Just really quick, last night, I know you said last night, Danny, sorry. I think
No,
obviously we're talking about looking at, you know, when to jump up, but I think on that other side of the coin, also acknowledging if there's areas that you can improve to be able to stay within your weight class if you are competitive and you want to be competitive, or you can be competitive. I think that's like one thing that I reflected on after Worlds, like when I got back, you know, tossing up between 120 plus and 120, I knew deep down that I didn't do enough with my nutrition to optimize that kind of prep. And I knew there was more I can squeeze out with my nutrition in terms of the quality of food, tracking more consistently, you know, working with someone to recomp more effectively so I can end up just staying at 120 and still get stronger. And that's something I've really realized for the last 6 weeks working with Tom, someone new for nutrition, is that obviously the accountability really helps, but just having a closer look at all these other variables with my nutrition that I could have been better at. And now that I'm doing them, I'm realizing that I have still some time left at 120.
Yeah. Like junior lifter, it's like, okay, weigh up what's your best weight class. And then it's like once you're open and like you're 6, 7 years down the track and like you're in your weight class, it's asking yourself, like, am I actually controlling all the variables that I control and am I doing it to like 120% kind of thing? And if you're not, then it's like, okay, you need to like make changes then and there. And if you are, then it's the consideration of like going up. That would be like the 2 pieces of advice I'd give to like, you know, like if we talk juniors and like open sort of like lifters.
Yeah. And for a matter of perspective, right? Like Sam, you're 8 years down the line and you're still tossing up, do I need to be 120 or 120 plus? Right. And I think the problem is, you know, you're just starting out and you're thinking of just holding yourself to that very first weight class. So that's where people get stuck. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
I was sorry, you go, Sam.
No, you're good.
All right.
Next
I was thinking about like what Shania said just a couple points ago. And it's to do with comparison, right? Like everyone has their high period and everyone has their low period. So there's no point comparing yourself to where your peers are, because you know, you could be feeling really high in one moment and then things are just going to be crashing down the next moment, and that's where you can get like a little bit depressed, a bit sad, right? So you know, I've got written down here like you're eventually going to hit PRs, you're eventually going to get hurt and have to rehab something, you're eventually going to win and you're eventually going to lose, right? So I guess like where do we start with that? Like
like you said, like everyone's at a different stage of training, right? Like, and I think I said this on the Nat Richards podcast in terms of like when I come back from Worlds, I'm really detrained, post injury, like weak as piss. I'm on Instagram, I'm seeing everyone else making progress, everyone else like, peaking for competition, being really strong. I'm seeing juniors lifting fucking more than I'm doing at the moment. And I'm just, it does get you down. So like, I think acknowledging that everyone is at a different stage of training and you can't compare yourself and put yourself down based off what you see online. And that little quote you said at the end there is really good because, yeah, like you're going to PR, you're going to get stronger. Maybe just the time's not right now.
Yeah, exactly. Like it's just not your time in this given moment, but your moment will come, right? And if you're trying to force things and try and play catch up, it usually doesn't play out well, right? Like at some point, say you've optimized everything, right? Like training, sleep, nutrition, there's only so much you can do. The next step after you've optimized all that is just to sustain it, because now you're at the tippy top of how fast you're able to make these gains of adaptation, right? So if you start to get a little bit aggressive because you're comparing yourself to other people, you're, instead of going further and getting more optimal, it's just drawing from, forcing more recovery, essentially risking injury for no increased gain, right? So it becomes a very long game once you've got everything down pat, right? But yeah, let's see, what else do I have? I've got in terms of technique, aim for as optimal as comfortable, and then good enough is good enough.
Yeah.
I was talking about that with Sam before. Yeah, like not chasing the perfect technique. Like I think that's a big one. Like especially for me, like I know, like since I started lifting, it's like the lifts that like I'm not 100% confident in, or like depending when that changes, throughout blocks of training, it's like if something doesn't move how it's like you think it should move or you want it to move, or like you don't deem it good enough, it's like you almost like overanalyze or like nitpick it, or like I just get like really frustrated that it didn't move how like it should have moved, when at the end of the day like it doesn't matter. Or like me trying to like make my squat look more squatty, where it's like I'm always going to be a hingy squatter. It's like the more I try and like fix it and like make it look like perfect, the worse it's going to be.
Yeah. I think when you first start out, right, like say you don't have any experience under your belt in terms of like technique, how things should feel. So you're looking at your favorite lifters and you go, okay, they look like this. I need to make my squat or bench or deadlift look like this as well, right? Or you could, I guess, go into the weeds and look into biomechanics. It's like, all right, if I maximize doing this, then it's going to be as efficient as possible. And like the clearest example is usually like deadlift stance and standing as wide as possible, toes out, hook grip, right? And it's like not everyone can get into that position. And if you start forcing it on your body, like one, it might not just feel good, and two, you might end up getting hurt eventually. It doesn't always lead to getting hurt, but like say for example, if you're doing it, doesn't feel good, and then you keep forcing it, like it's showing you that it's not working, right? So working with something where it's like technique's good enough so that you can execute it and it looks consistent and you're not like experiencing any flare-ups or whatever, then that's a good enough technique that you can refine and get stronger at over time. It's not always about like, if I have my finger width 1 inch out or one finger further out wider, that's going to give you the biggest gains. The biggest gains is just sticking to it and getting that practice component. Because yeah, like if you're constantly changing technique, you're not ingraining these movement patterns.
Well, it kind of comes back to like the comparison thing in terms of, social media and younger lifters wanting to replicate techniques of all these lifters online, right? Like there's no good and bad technique, and one technique doesn't work for everyone. So I think like spending your time as a younger lifter just to find what works for you. And sometimes it might not look pretty, it might not be conventional, but it can be what works for you and what gets you strong. So I think, yeah, try not to compare yourself definitely to other lifters. And then also, yeah, realizing that technique is a very broad spectrum. And try not to like mold yourself within one certain way of moving.
Yeah. Last one I've got here, and we touched on it a bit earlier, but powerlifting still exists after sub juniors, juniors, and opens. So you don't have to go out guns blazing in your quote unquote final year. Yeah, pretty simple. I guess like when you get to those final years of your division, it's very easy to get caught up in like trying to capitalize on every single moment, which you could argue is a good thing. It's a good trait to have because as you start getting older, you spend more time in the sport, you could get complacent and you're not keeping those things dialed in. But if it comes to a detriment where it's like you're doing it because you feel like, you're about to quote unquote retire after this, right? And there's nothing else that you're going to do after. That's where you could get in trouble because you're pushing all these methods and then you age up and you realize, I still have 4 or 5 or however many years I have left. But what I'm doing right now is unsustainable.
Yeah, it's quite a like tunnel vision mindset to be in because it's like you're basically already setting yourself up to essentially, like you just said, like retire after you either like finish being a sub junior or finish being a junior, right? Because like if you have it in your head that like, okay, you want to be at this weight class because you want to go to like junior worlds in like the last year of like you being a junior, but then it's like you have no goals to like you're cutting yourself short by like thinking about that rather than like planning long term where you're like, okay, maybe I'll like, my goal is then also get to open worlds in this weight class. It's like have the long term goal first and then have that as like, okay, this is the stepping stone again, right? Rather than like that being the end game, because then you're already gonna like potentially set yourself up to lose as soon as that year's done. And it's like if that's like the only goal you have and that's like a year down the track, you don't actually end up going to worlds as a junior in that weight class. Like what does that look like from like a motivational, a mindset sort of sense? Like are you just gonna like fall off the bandwagon because like you feel like you didn't do what you wanted to do, and does that mean like end game for powerlifting? Or if it's just a stepping stone and like long term it's like, okay, well I'm actually going to go to worlds as an open, then you still have all this work that you can kind of do and you're like setting yourself up for like a little bit more success, I feel like.
Yeah, I think probably one of the best examples of this would be Tony Cliff, the 120 GOAT. Like just listening to his story on a podcast he did, he sees like these lifters now coming in, like going guns blazing, balls to the wall, getting really, really strong, but how sustainable is that? Whereas like you look at him, right, he's kind of admitted to, in his early years doing the minimum, training twice a week, training 3 times a week, very minimal dose, like just doing enough. But he did that consistently for 20 years, right? And now he's like one of the best in the world, strong as fuck, and still knocking around being a little bit older. My man Tony Cliff, I won't say old. But yeah, like if you look at people like that, like it's that classic marathon, right? Like do a little bit of effort or, just the right amount of effort consistently week after week after week. And then that's what's going to get you results. And eventually you'll get there. Rather than trying to push that needle, come in guns blazing, balls to the wall, and then just, not having that longevity in the sport.
Yeah. It's hard though, right? Because at the same time, Sam, and I guess all of us know, like when you get to a high level, it's not just minimal effort, but it's consistent effort. You need to be able to sustain pretty much like enough. You need to sustain enough effort, and effort grows over time, right? So if you're coming in your first year and like it's okay to obsess over it and take it seriously, like I did when I first started. But it's like if like Shania said, you've created this end goal in your mind that's happening in like a year, right? where's all the motivation going to go after that? And how are you going to continue doing these behaviors that lead you to where you are now, right? So having an understanding of your why and why you're going to keep doing this, I think is very important. And I think like when you first start, right, like you do it because it's fun and that's cool. And eventually you're going to get to a point where it might not be fun anymore, right? But I like my personal values was like, I wanted to get really, really good at something. And I guess whatever comes after that, I'm willing to do. Right. And initially it was easy because like you'd see the results come really easy. So you're getting this positive reinforcement and it's, I guess, very motivating. But like you said, if that motivation just dies out, there's like, what are you going to do? Right. So it's very important for younger lifters to set themselves up for success by like having something that you could chase that's really far down the line. You might not ever hit it, but it's like, that'll keep you going rather than trying to just attain this goal in the here and now.
Yeah, I think that kind of ties into like, I guess, I don't know, half end it, but it's kind of like, I think no matter where you are, no matter like when you started, how long you've been in the sport for, like, it's like treat yourself like an athlete if that's what you want to do, and like get coaches, whether that's a powerlifting coach, nutrition coach. Like if you treat yourself like an athlete and you get a team that supports you and you get people around you and like you make it fun and enjoyable, the sport becomes part of your life, which makes it so much easier long term. It doesn't become this like side thing that you have to go do after you work or, you know, before you work. It becomes something that you kind of like actually enjoy doing. You know, you're with friends at the gym, like it's, you know, it's a part of your lifestyle. It's like all the components of powerlifting, coaching, nutrition, recovery, all that just becomes a part of your life, rather than trying to juggle and puzzle all these like separate pieces and then getting, you know, a few years down the track and feeling like it's all too much.
Yeah. I think that was a good way to tie things off. We're going to end this episode here just because it's starting to run out of time. But thanks for listening, guys, and we will see you in another episode of the Roundtable.
Thanks.